Okay, and then I'll just do that on the screen. So that there are thousands of people watching. Okay, Zok the hele Gemara. The Chachamim Oimrim Morchen Oisa Memkar. Omer Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shmuel Muter LaAdam LaHashtin Mayim B'Soich Dalat Amos Shel Tefillah. A person is allowed to be mashtin Mayim within 4 amos of Tefillah. Let's see what Rashi says. B'Dalat Amos Shel Tefillah, Rashi says LaAchar Zman. So it seems like we're not talking about the physical distance. We're talking about the time. In other words, you don't have to wait. You can relieve yourself right away. Amr Rabbi Yosef, my kamash malon. What is the chiddush of this halacha that the Shmuel is telling us? Tanina, we learned it in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Meichen Oisa l'shum chatzor. You're allowed to sell a basic knesses without identifying its use as a general chatzor. And then v'lokeach masha yirtzayasen, and v'lokeach can do whatever he wants with it. He can get it rezoned. But I feel Rabbanan, and even the Rabbanan who put restrictions, like Kamri ala Beis HaKnesses, the Kavir Kedushasim. And even though they said that even the Rabbanan put restrictions as 4 uses that a shul cannot be used for, that's the Beis HaKnesses itself. The Kavir Kedushasim, because it has a Kavir of Kedusha. Aval Dalet Amis, the Dalet Amis of Tefillah, where you could be davening anywhere. The loy kavir kedusha sai, it's not a kavir of kedusha like a shul. Loy, that wouldn't be a problem. So that means that until now the Gemara is referring to proximity and distance. So Shmuel was saying mutal adam lahashtamayim b'sech dalaramis, meaning physically, if you daven somewhere, you're allowed to be mashtamayim within dalaramis. So the Gemara asks, Yehuda tells us that. Yehuda tells us it's not a problem, and your abundance well, hold it wouldn't be a problem. The Gemara, mispal marchik dalar amis umashtin, v'amashtin marchik dalar amis umispal. So Rav Nachman said that I think this is what Rashi is going on. When Rashi says it here, "V'dalat amis shel tefillah." No, "v'dalat amis shel tefillah" means over here. Oh no, so I misunderstood the Gemara. So let me go back a second. Shmuel said, "Muted aladim lahashim shech dal amish shel tefillah." That means proximity. But Rashi is adding that even though it's proximity, it still can't be immediately. You still have to wait some time. So that's what the Gemara ends up referring to. So Shmuel is addressing proximity. Shmuel says you're allowed to be mashkin within 4 amos of a place that you daven, provided that you waited a certain amount of time that we'll see soon. And that Rabbi Yosef asks, what's the chiddush? The Mishnah seems to be saying the same thing. Zokamor, no. With the Mishnah, you would only know a base of medrash, a base of knesses that has a kvias. It's a permanent place. There you have to be 4 amos away. But tefillah, which you could have davened anywhere, you wouldn't know that if it was. But tefillah, which could be anywhere, Shmuel is telling us that there's no kvias of kedusha. Someone who davens has to go 4 amos away. You have to be 4 amos away from where you daven. So Amar Lei, Rav Nachman told him, I'll agree with you that if someone relieves himself, he shouldn't daven right there. He should walk away 4 amos. Because we know the Mishnah that says, how far should someone stay away from Meir Gleim or from Soya? Dalar amos. Why, if you daven in one place, why can't you daven right away? I'm sorry, why can't you be mashkin right away? And if you're going to say that the fact that you merely daven there made that place a makom kadosh, and because of that you can't be mashkin, well then the hagi could shinu l'chulu shvila d'nardo, because people daven all over Nardo. And if you're going to say that in a makom, in a place where someone davened, you could no longer be mashkin, so then you could never be mashkin anywhere in Nardo. As Rashi says, she'ein loch dalar amis behen, you will not find 4 amos, a place of 4 amos by 4 amos anywhere in Nardo, that someone didn't daven there. People are always davening in Nardo. And if that's the case, you wouldn't be able to ever go to the washroom there. That doesn't make sense. Tani, so therefore the Gemara learns Yisha. It doesn't mean Kama Yarchik, because of course there is no halacha that says that if you daven in a place, you can't be mashing right there. The halacha is telling you that when you go to the washroom, you have to wait. Dalet Amos. So Zakhamar Bishlema Mashtin Yishak the Hilach Dalet Amos Mishum Tzaitis. I understand why. If someone just went to the washroom, he shouldn't daven right away. He should wait a little bit of time. Mipnei Tzaitis. And what Tzaitis are is actually Machlekes Rishonim. Rashi says, Shalo Yitanfu Begadav B'Nitotos Shabbat Mosai. So I'm assuming what it means is when a person relieves himself and he's taking it out, he shouldn't put it back in till all of the drips drop off when it's dry, because otherwise his pants are going to get wet, and then it's not appropriate. He should daven with pants that were wet. The Ran says something that's a little bit different. It might gross you out. The Ran says that it's a given that his pants are going to have drips of Meir Glayim on it. But if you wait, they'll at least get absorbed into his clothing. They won't stick out, and then you should daven. That's what the Ran says. And believe it or not, the Mishnah Berurah brings down the Ran, not Rashi. Rashi says, make sure that you dry it off and you don't make yourself wet. Okay, so talk to the Gemara. So that makes sense. But Ela Mispalo Yishik Hilach Dalet Amos, someone who davens, he has to wait the amount of time it takes to walk Dalet Amos to go to the bathroom. Lumily, what's the problem with that? On Ravashi, there's a reason for that. Shekal Dalet Amos, how long does it take to walk Dalet Amos? 2 seconds? But though that period of time, to philosophy sudur b'fiv, a person is still focused on his davening. It means even like his lips could even be moving. In other words, when a person finishes davening, he still has to wind down. And during that wind down period, it's not appropriate that he should go to the washroom. So Allah L'maisa, as far as proximity, there is no limitation as to how far someone has to be from a place where someone urinated. You could daven right there. You're allowed to daven in the stairwell, even in the downtown building. But time-wise, a person should keep at least a couple of seconds of pause between when he went to the washroom, so that things should dry up, or even after he daven before he goes to the washroom, so his mind should be out of the tefillah, and therefore his mind will not be in the tefillah during that action. Zayin Lamed Peinun, I think these are the initials of people who are going to quote. Simon. Shalu Talmidav is Reb Zakkai. So that's the Zayin. The Talmidim asked Reb Zakkai, how were you Zoicha to live such a long time? This is a Gushmaka Gemara because it's all about Arichas Yom. And it's funny because there's a whole bunch of different people quoting, and not one person told me the school that Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky told me. When I asked Reb Shmuel, what's the school to live for a long time? He told me the best school I can tell you is to lose 20 pounds. So that's what Reb Shmuel said. But none of the Gemara says it. Shalom Talmidav is Rabbi Zakkai. Ba'meh harachta yam. In what schools did you live a long time? Zok Omer Lam, he told him, Miyamai, in all my days, lo yishtanti mayim v'soich dalet amos of tefillah. I never relieved myself within 4 amos of tefillah. That was a midas chasidus, because we don't have to. We just learned now you don't have to do that. We just learned now that you don't have to wait. I never used a nickname for my friend. And I never missed making kiddush on a kois. I never missed making kiddush on a kois. I had an elderly mother. Once upon a time, where I couldn't get a hold of wine, she sold her headdress with the money. So they tell us, the Mefarshim tell us that if she didn't see all her son's life, that he was so makbid on kiddush with a kois, she wouldn't have sold her kapra, her headdress, to buy him wine. She saw, it must be that she saw that was so important to him. Now, there's also a skula that if someone's makbid with kiddush on wine, he'll become a noisher. So Tanakh Mesa, Hinichaloi, Gimel Meyer's Garbiyain, she left over to him 600 jugs of wine. Kishemesu, and when he died, Hinich Levanav Shloishes Alofim Garbiyain. So you see that he left them over a lot. There was a shiras there that I guess it's attributing to his Mesiras Nefesh to always have Kiddush on wine. Rav Huna have her Asa Risa, the Koi Kamei de Rav. Rav Huna was once wearing not a normal belt. Rashi says he was wearing a belt that was made out of silk, which wasn't the normal mingemi, some type of grass. It was grass, I'm sorry. He was wearing some type of belt made out of grass. In other words, he didn't have his regular belt. Omar Lay, so Rav asked him, my high, what is this? What happened to your belt? Omar Lay, I didn't have wine for Kiddush. Rashi said, I didn't have wine for Kiddush. And therefore I pawned off my belt, and using that money, I bought wine for Kiddush. So, because of that act of Mesiras Nefesh, for Kiddush al Yain, his Rebbe Rav gave him a bracha. Amalei Yehei Rava Deseitun b'Shiyurim. You should be covered over, completely covered over with fine silk clothing. I think Shiyurim is silk clothing or totally fancy clothing. So it got a very big bracha. But it's funny that often when you get a bracha, you'll respond to Chen Lamar. You should get the same bracha as I got. Here, Rav Huna didn't respond. Ki Ichlal Rabba Barei, when the son of Rav Huna got married, the night of his wedding, the night of Rabba's wedding, who happened to be the son of Rav Huna, it happens to be that Rav Huna Inish Gutzah. Rav Huna was a short man. He was a small, short guy. Gana Purya, and he was tired. It was the end of a long night. So he lied down on a bed. But he was so thin and small, people didn't even notice that he was on the bed. And Osibante, Vichalse, his children, and his daughter-in-law came, and Sholcham, they took off their clothing, they took off their wedding clothing, their fancy clothing, the Shajan Menaya Alei Ade Item Bishiroi, and they threw their clothing on the bed, not even realizing he was there, so he was totally covered by this pile of clothing, which is really a kiyum of the bracha that Rav gave. Shama Rav, when Rav heard that his bracha was mukuyim, the ikbid, he was upset at Rav Huna. Omar, he said, "My time when I gave you a bracha, you see the bracha work. Why didn't you say the chen lamar?" There are those who ask, I mean, the bracha work because he got covered over with shmatis. I mean, what type of bracha is that? But the Meforshim tell us that what it means is that he saw that his bracha would be mekuyim, so he knew it would also lead to a big shefa pranasa. So therefore he's upset. Why didn't you say v'chein lamar? And the Meforshim tells us the reason why he didn't say v'chein lamar is because while Rav Huna was a little guy, Rav was a big guy. And if they would have covered Rav with the same shiroyim that they would have covered Rav Huna with, it would have barely covered him. So that's why I didn't say the Chenim. Sha'alu Talmidav as Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua b'amei arachtiyam. They asked Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua, why were you zoicha for long life? Amalehen biyami lo yasisi kapandri lo Beis HaKnesses. I never took shortcuts through the Beis HaKnesses. Lo pasati al rashi am kadosh. When I walked into the Beis Medrash, everyone used to sit on the floor and learn. I never walked through the crowd. I always came early, so I didn't have to walk through the crowd, which is a little bit of a demeaning to the crowd around you. And I never duchened without a bracha. Okay? And that's why he was such. They asked Rav Preda, so Tosfos asks right away, why would they ask? The Gemara tells us elsewhere why he had a Richa Shem. Tosfos says, Kasha. The Adirabah. The Gemara tells us that he once said over the same halacha to make sure that his Talmud understood it 400 times. And at that point, the Novak Baska of Amar, no lech the liske kula dara la almadasi, your whole door will be zechet aylam haba, or the lichi dalad meishnin, or you'll live 400 years. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu yavi lehavaha, give them both. So you see that they're afraid to live 400 years in the schus that he explained something 400 times. So that's why he lived on. So Zok Tosfos Yishlomi to me, Karla Yada came at the Messiah Shira Shachaya Kolkach. We didn't know that was his schus because he at 400 we realized it was the schus of 400 times. But I guess this occurred much earlier, so therefore we didn't know that that would be the reason. And other Mepharshim say, could be this, these Talmidim asked him this question even before he ever had the situation we explained something 400 times. Could be by the time he explained it 400 times, he was already an old man, just not 400 yet. So the answer prayed, no one ever got to the Beis Medrash before me. I was always the first one in. I never benched before the Kohen. Rashi learns that's referring to Birchas Hamazon, and Tosfos learns it's referring to getting an aliyah. I never ate from a behema that they had not yet taken off the tzroya the lechayim and the keva, even though there's no issue in doing that. Rabbi Yitzchak said in the name of Berech, you're not supposed to eat from a behema that the matazah should not have, that we're not taken off yet. But the halacha is not like Rabbi Yitzchak. So in fact, you are allowed to eat from a behema if you're afraid it was makbid nati. Are you telling me that it's a good thing that the Talmud Chacham, like Rav Preda, the Gadol, like Rav Preda, lowered himself and didn't take the first bracha to show deference to a Kohen? But that's not true. That's not the right thing to do. Call Talmud Chacham shemavarech lefanav afilu Kohen Gadol amaretz. If a Kohen Gadol allows, if a Talmud Chacham allows an amaretz to bench before him, even if that amaretz happens to be a Kohen Gadol, always say Talmud Chacham chayiv misa. Because what it ends up doing is it degrades the value of a Talmud Chacham to the people who are looking, and it makes them lose respect for Talmud Chacham. Shenemar kol mesanei ahavu mavas. Whoever make me be hated are people who love death. Al triki mesanai. Don't learn people who hate me. Al masniai, people who make me be hated. So by Talmud Chacham not commanding the proper respect for the Torah that he represents, that makes Hashem be a little hated, and because of that, it's chayiv misa. So how is it that Rav Preda was allowed to let the Kohen bench first? Because of the Gemara, it means that he was also a big Talmud Chacham. He was a big Talmud Chacham together. He was a Kohen as well. So even though maybe Rav Preda was a little bit bigger Talmud Chacham than the Kohen, but he showed deference to the Kahuna, and he let the Kohen make the bracha first. Why did you live so long? He told him, I never benefited from my friend's hurt. Right? And I never took onto my bed the kalol of my chaver, meaning I always made sure to be moichel everybody when I went to bed. And vatrin b'mamayni hayusi, and I was a vatrin with my money. And it gives examples of each of these things. But the story of Huna, Dori Mora Akaspe. He was carrying a shovel on his shoulder. He was walking with a shovel over his shoulder. Also, Rav Chana bar Chaniloi. Rav Chana bar Chaniloi wanted to be Mechaber Rav Huna because and he took the shovel from Rav Huna. He says, "You don't have to carry a shovel. I'll carry it for you." Omer So Rav Huna told Rav Chana bar Chaniloi, before I let you take my shovel, you regilas the Doris Messiah. If you walk around normally with a shovel, that's how you normally walk around, so that you're not lowering yourself to carry my shovel. Dori, I don't mind if you carry my shovel. But Viloi, but if you normally don't carry a shovel, that means by you carrying a shovel, you're belittling yourself. Isyakuria, no, Bizalusha the Dach, me looking choshev that I have you carrying my shovel on your expense, Loi Nichali. That's something that I'm absolutely not happy with. It's interesting. We have a rule that we never celebrate the downfall. So the Meshech Chochmah comments on this week's parsha, where Hashem told us in this week's parsha that we're going to have Pesach 7 days. Now, why do we have Pesach 7 days and not 1 day? So the first day of Pesach is to celebrate our freedom from Mitzrayim. The seventh day of Pesach is to celebrate Kriyas Yamsuf. The problem is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them the mitzvah of Pesach for 7 days, it was before Kriyas Yamsuf. Hashem was already mitzvah them on the mitzvah of 7 days of Pesach before Kriyas Yamsuf. The Meshech Chochmah writes, the reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu did it that way is because after Kriyas Yamsuf, when the Mitzrayim were Tov Mayom, he would not have established a Yom Tov to celebrate that, because there's never a Yom Tov celebrated on the destruction of anybody. And that's why Purim, the destruction, the day we won the war was on Yud Gimel. But we celebrate on the day Shenochu Me'aveyim. We celebrate on the day that we rested. So we're always celebrating for the fact that we were saved, that we had it good. We never celebrate the day that we've destroyed our enemies. Well, also on the Tazakilas Chaverai, when he would get onto his bed, getting ready to go to bed, he would say, anybody who bothered me today, I'm okay. I was a vater with my money. He never asked for change. If there was something that they bought that was that he paid more for, he would say, you can keep the change. You, Rabbi Nechunya, why did you merit to live so long? Also, Gavzi the Kamachale. If you're asking somebody why were you to live so long, it almost is like you have a problem. Like, do you have a problem that I'm alive so long? What do you want to kill me? So because of that, Rabbi Nechunya's henchman, Muslim, slapped Rabbi Akiva across the face. Says, how dare you ask such a question, as if you don't want Rabbi Nechunya Agadol to live? So Salak Yosef Aresha the Dikla, he was afraid they would beat him up. So Rabbi Akiva was probably an agile person, and he climbed up to the top of a palm tree. Amalei Rebbe, he said, Rebbe, I'm not asking. Im Nemar Keves, it says a Keves Echatasa Baboikir. So if it says Keves, Keves is a lashon of a single animal. So we know it's already a single animal. Lama Nemar Echad, why did they have to Echad? Amalahu. So from such a question, Rebbe saw that Rabbi Akiva, who asked such a question, Rabbi Akiva is a Talmid Chacham. He's not just a regular person that's asking the disgusting question. It must be that he's doing it to learn Torah. Amalu, he told his Talmidim, Tzuver midrabanan hu shafku, don't bother. So Amalei, what did Rebbe answer? Echad miyuchad shabi. It means that you need to take not just one animal, but you have to take the best animal that you're able to find in your entire flock. So the Mefarshim asked, Vosepes Rabbi Akiva climbed a palm tree, and Vosepes he asked Punk this question, and what did Rebbe see Punk from this question that Rabbi Akiva was a Talmid Chacham? So he says the reason why the Rabbi Akiva's taina was is he asked Rabbi Nechunya, you're surrounded by people who aren't good. I guess Rabbi Nechunya lived in a generation where the people weren't good. So his question is, how were you zoicha that you weren't impacted by the averis of your kehillah? Why is it that you weren't impacted and you lived so long, even though your kehillah isn't so perfect? Good morning. So the answer was because Rebbe is because of Nechunya Hagadol never took anything from his kehillah, and he also never took anything from his kehillah. He was able to stay shielded and sheltered from them, insulated from them, that he wasn't mushba at all from any of their evil doings. And that's why he asked the question of Keves Echad, Miyuchad Sheba'edroi, to indicate to Rebbe, to signify to Rebbe that I know that you must be Miyuchad Sheba'edroi if you are Zoichet Arichas Yamim, even though you live in the generation of sinners. And that's how Rebbe Chad. That's another reason why I call it a dekel, because a dekel is a tree that it's very difficult to get its pears, because all of its pears are way, way, way on the top. So that's another thing that Rabbi Akiva was signaling to Rabbi Nechunya, is that I know that you didn't take any hana from your congregation. Amalei. So Rabbi Nechunya answered to Rabbi Akiva, you want to know why I was a long life? Because miyamei like kibalti matanos, I never accepted gifts. V'lo al midoisai, and I never was makbid on things. Unvati b'mamanya, you see, and I was a vatrin with my money. And then he gives examples. Like kibalti matanos kiyad Rabbi Lozer, kiyavim eshadri lematanos v'leinesia. When they would send him gifts from the Nasi's house, he wouldn't accept them. If they would invite him to a meal, again he wouldn't go. I have ozl. Amalu would tell him, I don't understand. We know Sainim Atanas Yichya. You don't want me to live? If you're giving me gifts, that means you want to kill me. So he brings down from the Chasam Sofer. Chasam Sofer says a lot of people take gifts, a lot of Rabbanim take gifts. What's pshat? So he says it doesn't say someone who doesn't take Matanas Yichya, just Soinim Matanas Yichya. You can take them as long as you hate them.
Who said that? I'm sorry.
Chasam Sofer. You know for the Chasam Sofer. You can take matanos, but you should be very uncomfortable. You shouldn't be looking for matanos. I was getting matanos. If it's absolutely necessary, accept it. But it's definitely not something that you should be happy about. It's the very, very, very last resort. When they would send him gifts from Ben Yisiyah, also lo have a shakel because of signing matanos yichya. But when they would invite him to eat with them, also he would go. You know why? Amar Isyakurei de Misyakribi. They want to host me. It's a covet for them when they host me, so I'm not going to deny that. What does that mean? Anybody who's Ma'avar Amidoisov, Ma'avir and Mimenu called Peshov, they're going to be Mechel all of his affairs. To who is there a Bonish like Noise Avain? A person who himself also looks away from other people who heard him. Shol Rebbe es Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Rabbi asked Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, what were you zeichel about? So Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha was a little bit insulted. Like, are you angry that I live so long? Does it bother you? Rabbi, no. I'm not complaining that you're living long. I'm happy that you're living long. I want to learn Torah, and there's something to learn from your Rich Hashanah. He told him, I never looked into the face of a Russia. I never looked at a Russia. Will tell him Mus Adam Russia. It says that the Navi said that I would never have looked at Yehoram, who's a Russia, but since Yeshafat is also consulting me about the same question, I'm going to respond. I wouldn't have looked at you at all if it wasn't for the fact that Yeshafat was here. So interesting enough, the Mefarshim asks, if it's usher to look in the face of a Russia, so why is Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha being zeicha to an extra gift of Arichas Yomim? Because he did something, he refrained from doing something that's usher. And the answer is even though you're not supposed to look in the face of a Russia, it's very difficult to go through life and avoid that. It's very difficult. You're always encountering people that you have to speak to. And therefore, he was able to avoid it, even though most people cannot, and that's why he was zeicha to it. Someone who looks at a Russia, his eyesight will be weakened. Shenemar, when Yitzchak got old, he wasn't able to see well. And the Gemara says, why did that happen? You should be stakol be'esav a Russia. Because he looked at Esav. Is that what caused him to lose his eyesight? We learned earlier, you should never think that the klal of a hedyot doesn't have an impact. Avimelech cursed Sarah, and in fact, her child Yitzchak suffered because of the klala that Avimelech gave to Sarah. The word he said meant to be nice, but in an underhanded, backhanded way, it was a klala as well. I'm going to give you gifts that should cover your eyes. It should take care of the it should take care of your damages. But he also meant in an underhanded way, I want to blind you. So, frankly, how could you say that Yitzchak became blind because of Esav? Maybe he became blind because of that. So, they were both factors that contributed to Yaakov's blindness. Looking into a Russia is not good. When Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha was dying, Omer Lei, his Talmud Rebbe, said to him, Omer Lei, Rebbe, give me a bracha. Omer Lei, so Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha gave the following bracha to his Talmud, who was Rebbe, who was a Nasi. You should be Zoicha to live half as long as I did. Frekt Rebbe, why are you saying that? Why don't you give me a bracha? I should have a long life like you. Omer Lei, me, I lived a long time because I don't have any special type of position that my children are going to get after I die, and therefore I should live a long time. But your children, they also want to have an opportunity to be a nasi. You want them to be waiters their whole life? Verkehrt. You should die a little younger. You shouldn't die so old. So your children also have an opportunity to be the nasi. So the Mefarshim asked, why didn't he ask Rabbi Shua bar Korcha, give me a bracha that not only should I live very long, they should also live very long. So even if after I become a nasi, even after I'm a nasi for a very long time, they'll also be able to have their share. But I didn't see a terrace to that. Zokamar about Arvur Bahi Uminyamin Barihi. Chad Amar Tesili, I deserve credit. Takalti Bikusi, I never looked at a guy. The Chad Amar Tesili, the other one said, I deserve credit. Abdi Shutvis Badikusi. I never made a shutvis, I was never a partner with a guy. And the problem of being a partner with a guy, Tosfos asks, it's also to be a partner with a guy. Zok Tosfos, no. Why is it also to be a partner with a guy? Is because you might have a situation with your partner where a shvu will have to be made. And that's why it's also. So Tosfos says, even if you partner with a guy where you mitigate the problem of the isser because you're enraged into such that there'll never be a shvuah. For instance, you said that if you ever mechayiv a shvuah to me, you don't have to swear. The problem with a guy swearing is the guy's going to swear in the name of an avodah zarah, and you don't want that to happen. You don't want to cause that to happen. But feel yochel al shu yifteredim. So you can make a deal in your partnership that if the guy owes you a shvuah, you're moichel the shvuah. So you're signing a release, a waive. You're waiving any reason for a shvuah, so that you've avoided the problem for an isser. Still, I wouldn't partner up with a guy. The shari b'shnar b'nadam, for anybody else, it would be mutter. He didn't want to make a partnership with a guy, no matter what. So that was Rabbi Ihi. Shalom Talmid for Rabbi Zera. The Talmidim asked Rabbi Zera, "But why were you to live a long time?" I never became makbid, I never became angry in my own home. I never walked in front of someone who was greater than me. I never thought on learning in places where I wasn't allowed to. That's also for everybody. Again, I'm a first say, but many people can't avoid sometimes doing that, and he was successful in avoiding that. I never went 4 hours without Torah or without tefillin. And I never slept in the Beis Medrash. I never fell asleep. Sayev to Rav give a short drasha, or Sayev to Rav give a long drasha. I didn't fall asleep, not a shinis kva, not a shinis aray. With the kolas chaverai, I was never happy when I saw my friend go down. One is a nickname that even if the family accepted for themselves, and one is a derogatory nickname. I never used a nickname. Rashi says, so not appropriate, not a nice nickname. Or even if it's a family name, but it's not their proper name, I never used it. I only refer to people by their formal name. My shver lived Kanai till 99. So whenever someone would ask him why he lived a long time, he would always cater the answer. So if I asked him, he would say, because I was mechabed my shver. And if my wife asked him, he would say, because I was mechabed my father. And if my cousin asked him, he would say, because I was mechabed my uncle. So he always made sure to provide the right answer that will provide the best benefits.
I find it interesting, Yosy, that nobody used the classic reasons. I didn't speak Lashon Hara. I did kibbud av v'em. I was honest in business. I did shluach hakan. All those classic reasons, no one's even mentioning those.
The Bali Musar say, if you're looking for the silver bullet, these things are all over the place. So what is the silver bullet? What do all of these things have in common? So I saw one thing from Chaim Shmulevitz. What they all have in common is their mi'olam. You could pick any mitzvah that you want to focus on, and if you do it 100% and you never give up on that mitzvah, that creates a Hashem. So it's not the individual thing that they happen to have done. It's the fact that they were able to stick to it their entire lives.
Yeah, most of these things are more derech eretz than doing a particular mitzvah.
Doesn't that tell you something?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Shmuel, what are you saying? Oh, yeah, I hear. In my mind, he's still alive. Okay, so the Helig Gemara weiter. V'oidam Arbuda. Basic Knesset Shechara. What if a basic Knesset was Chara? So it's no longer what we would say in its prime. Ein maspidin b'soicha. You're still not allowed to say a hesped in the besmedrash. So right away, what jumps out at you is we say hespedim in shuls today when they're still built, when they're still in their prime. So the Gemara will explain where that comes from. So you're not allowed to say a hesped in the besmedrash shachar. Vein mafshilum b'soicha chavolim. You're not allowed to spread ropes across it. I guess they spread ropes to hang things on. I'm not sure exactly why, or maybe they made ropes by spreading them out. You're not allowed to spread nets there to catch animals. You wouldn't be allowed to spread pears on the roof, even of a besmedrash that's abandoned. You're not allowed to use it for a shortcut. It says, I'm going to make desolate your holy places. And we learn that even when they're desolate, they're still called Mikdashechem. What happens if what if grass grows? It's a ruin, so grass and weeds grow and it becomes overgrown. You might think you're supposed to trim it to make it look nice. Lo yitlash, you shouldn't trim it to make it look nice. We want anyone walking by to have their hearts bleed from pain when they see the ruins and the overgrowth of this premise that would maybe prompt them to rebuild it, to rejuvenate it. Tanur you cannot do anything that's of light-headed activities in the basic Knesset. And we're soon going to see things that to us don't seem to be kalas roish are considered kalas roish. So what are the list? You're not allowed to eat. You're not allowed to drink. So these are all examples of things that are kalas roish. What else can't you do in the besmedrash? You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to get dressed in the besmedrash. Maybe you came from out of town and you have a wedding, so you go to the nearest shul to change. You're not allowed to use them as a mall to walk around and relax there. If there's blistering heat outside, you want to get some shade, you're not allowed to duck into a shul to get some shade. Or you're not allowed to duck into a shul to get out of the rain. And you're not allowed to be masbid the hesped of a yachid. So let's hear what Rashi has later. Aval karin behen, you're allowed to learn in the shul, which is what you're supposed to do. The shining ben umaspidin behen hesped shal rabbim. What is the hesped shal rabbim? Shel tamid chacham shemeis shetzrichen lis asay ulaspida ubeisek knesses royal klach lefusha beis gadol. So here Rashi is giving us a little bit of a clue. If it's a hesped that's going to attract a lot of people, and later on in the Gemara we're going to see that not only if the mace, if the nifter is a Talmid Chacham, but if there's going to be Talmid Chacham or Rabbanim that are being masped, so there's going to be something that's going to attract a crowd, and the shul is a big enough place to contain a crowd, that's when you are allowed to be masped in the shul. Amar Yehuda, Emasai b'Yeshuva. This discussion of what you must avoid in a shul is when the shul is established. Aval b'cherbanan, but once the shul is already churv, manichin oisan v'oilin b'hen asaven. You're allowed to do these things in them, and you allow grass to grow. Yitloish, and you shouldn't uproot the grass. You shouldn't cut the grass. B'pnei agmas nefesh. In fact, the Gemara asavim mandachar shemayu. Where do asavim? We're middle talking about what you're allowed to do in the besmedrash. Now we're talking about growth. What's going on? Zoktumar chisur mechsera. Chisur mechsera. We're missing some information. In a besmedrash that's established, you should sweep it, keep the floors clean. They would pour water on the ground and stomp it down, flatten it out, so no wheat should grow in the floor, so it should remain in besmedrash. Amar Yehuda, a mosai b'yeshuva. When do we have to be very careful to keep the floor clean and stop weeds or grass from growing in it? That's while the shul is still established. Once the shul is charav, then manichin oisan alalosh, then you allow grass to grow. And olu be'en asavim lo yitlosh, you should not tear the grass out, mepnei agmas nefesh, because of agmas nefesh. So let's see Rashi. Emasai mechabdin umarbitza moishon is biyeshuba. La'achashem mechabdin, after they sweep out the floor, mezalfan is hamayim, you pour water on it, laharbit is the to keep the dust down. Zok the Gemara Vayter. Amar Basi. They're all built with a t'nai. Rashi says, they're built with a t'nai that you should be able to enjoy the use of the shul, even though they're not char. Even though you're allowed to use shuls for other things, you're not allowed to do things that bring lightheadedness. So you're allowed to use them for things other than davening or learning, because they're built on a t'nai. But there's still a limit to what you're allowed to do. Remind you, what do we consider kalas roish? Cheshboinus. Business calculations, it's considered kalas roish, and you're not allowed to do that in the Besmedrash. So to me, that was a chiddush, because it's not a frivolous activity, it's not a party, it's focused. But even that's not allowed to be done in the Besmedrash, even with the t'nai, because that's called kalas roish. Omer Abasi, basic knesses, shemachashvim by cheshboinus, a basic knesses where people do business calculations in the basic knesses, malinin by a semes. You're allowed to leave a mace. You have to make a mace. You have to let a mace sleep there overnight. If you do cheshbonis in the besmedish, then you're mechuyev to put a mace there. It doesn't make any sense. Rather, what it means is if people violate the kedusha of the besmedish and they do business cheshbonis in the besmedish, what's going to happen is Rashi says it's going to cause tragedy in the city. People are going to die who don't have koivrin, and there's going to be a messy mitzvah. So that's a Rashi. So Rashi learns that you could make a t'nai even on a besmesh while it's being built, that you could do other things in it. Tosfos has a difference of opinion. So let's see Tosfos. But the Chassidus shall bavel al t'nai in the suyin right to loimer kozman shed betelin. Tosfos says this t'nai is not while the besmesh is still built. Tosfos says the t'nai only works that after the base medrash is chorev, then you can do other things in it. The Chasidim of Brisa del Il, we learned in the Brisa earlier that you can't do anything in the shul. The Gam, we also saw, let's look at the Hay. The Gam, we also saw ha'amayrayim shaloi hayu roitzin lichanush ben v'geshamim. We're going to quote stories later on where amayrayim didn't want to walk into a built base medrash to get out of the rain. Only because they were talking and learning. So here the t'nai that Rashi learned allows you to use the besmedrash even if it's built. No zaktosis. You can never use a besmedrash for anything when it's built, even with a t'nai. The t'nai only works after the besmedrash is chorev. The ozmahani at t'nai. The dafkin la'oshin shabababel. Here's a fascinating tosfos. The dafkin la'oshin shabababel mahani t'nai. The t'nai only helps for shuls that are in Bavel. You know why? Because in Bavel we're going to leave. We're eventually going to abandon Bavel, and we're going to move to Yisrael when Golus is over. The right time, Mashiach will come, and Tifka Kedushasam. They're going to lose their Kedusha. But the shuls in Eretz Yisrael, Loi Mahani T'nai will never help. Even after a shul is Chorev, it still has its full Kedusha. Sharei Kedushasan La'olam Kayemes. Okay, so that's what Tosfos says over here. So it's very, very interesting. I mean, let's touch this weiter. In Tomer, giving the Mahani T'nai Loish Shabbat Bavel, since the T'nai does help for the shuls of Bavel, in Kinkasham Hidol Il, the Ravina Davale Beknishta Ba'ari, Vamal Rabashi, Zil Zavna Mishiva Tu Be'er, he says you could plant it. Since it's a Besmesh that was Chorev, and Tosfos learns over here that you can make a T'nai that after Besmesh is Chorev, you can do anything in it. So why did he need this special Shiva Tu Be'er type of sale in order to be able to plant in it? Planting over in a field, making a field into a farm, that's such a terrible, terrible violation of Kedusha. The Tanai won't help for that. You needed that it should be sold by Shiva Tu Be'er. So the Chassam Sofer says that this is that we're talking that the Kedusha leaves the shuls in Bavel. That means the ground. The ground itself does not retain Kedusha. But the building, it's brought down. All the buildings, all the shul buildings will eventually be flown, will be imported into Eretz Yisrael. So it's only talking about the building and not the floor. And Chaim Tzvi said over a story, I believe with the Chassam Sofer, that there was a kehillah that had a shul, and like many buildings in those days, there were no floors. The earth, the mud, the sand was the floor. And for Bishmedish, they felt they should make a wooden floor. So he got up to speak there, and he said, when Mashiach comes, how are we all going to get to Eretz Yisrael? We'll all gather in the shuls, and the shuls will fly us to Eretz Yisrael. The problem is, that's only if the shul has a floor. When the shul goes airborne, you're in there inside it. But if there's no floor, the shul goes airborne, you're all stuck there on the ground. Huh? So right away after that, they put it on the floor. So I Taina here in the Aguda, we're going to fly first class. Yet in Lakewood, everyone's going to fly cattle class. Because if we're going to go into shuls, you go to a shul in Lakewood, you're jam-packed like a sardine. Here, Baruch Hashem, everybody has room. So in the Aguda, we're going to fly first class, Baruch Hashem, when Mashiach comes. Okay, Zok Tehel Gemar Vayter. Zok Tehel Gemar Vayter. The Eino Yisrael, but you're not allowed to use shuls. Amar Rabba, Chachamim v'Talmideim mutarim. Chachamim are allowed to prepare, do their personal things in shul, because that's their place, that's where they live. Amar B'Shum Levi, my Bei Rabbanon. What do you mean Bei Rabbanon? Basmedish, Beis of the Rabbanon. That's where they live. You're not allowed to seek shelter there. Todd Yadar Ravina, Rab Ada Bar Masna have a kaimi. They were standing. V'Shali Shilton. They were schmoozing and learning from Rabba. Also Zocha the Mitra. A huge storm of rain came while they were schmoozing and learning. So they continued their conversation in shul. Amri, they said, we didn't go because of the rain. If we were having a regular, secular, casual conversation, we wouldn't have dared to run into shul to use it as shelter. We are schmoozing and learning, and we need clarity. If we're going to be in the rain, we're not going to be able to focus properly. So we went into the Beis Medrash only so that we'll be able to focus on the learning properly. Because it has to be clear, like a day where there's I believe, a north wind, and north wind brings sunshine and blows away the clouds and makes it into a beautiful, clear day. What if you need to call somebody in shul, you got to call him out? How are you going to get a hold of him? You're not allowed to go into a shul. What you do? If you're a Talmid Chacham, so go into shul, sit and learn a little bit, and then after you learn a little bit, go get the guy. Vitanahu, and if you've not a Talmid Chacham, but you don't Mishnais, leim Mashnisin. Vikaru, if you don't know Mishnais, you don't know Chumash, leim Psuka, say Apostle. Viloi, and if you don't have any of these things, so then you have no reason to go into the Beis Medrash for Dvarim Shvik Dusha. Then what you should do is leim Lianuka, Emily Psukech. You can find a little child in the Beis Medrash. You can ask him, tell me what you learned today in Cheder. Inami Nishi Porta V'Nekim, or go to shul, sit down there a little bit, and then get up. What is a hesped of a rabbin? So Rab Chisda pointed to Rab Sheshes. He said, "Going to spedi the koy Rab Sheshes." A hesped that Rab Sheshes is in. Machli Rab Sheshes going to spedi the koy Rab Chisda. So that means the koy doesn't necessarily mean it's a hesped for Rab Chisda, hesped for Rab Sheshes. Any hesped that would be attended by Rab Sheshes. And the answer that would be attended by a Chisda would be a hesped the rabbin that you're allowed to do in shul. So that's why our hesped in Pasha is allowed to do in shul, because there's always rabbanim there. Rafram aspeda lechalse v'knishta. Rafram gave a hesped to his daughter-in-law in the Beis Medrash. Amar, he said, Mishum yakri didi, because of my honor, udemisa, and the mace herself, also kula amal, there's going to be a big crowd, and because of that, I'm allowed to make the hesped in shul. Rab Zera sapte lehumi rabbanim b'vechnishta. Rab Zera said a hesped for some big Talmid Chacham in the basic Knesset. Amar, he said, imishum yakri didi, imishum yakri didi demisa. Also kula amal, either because they want to hear me or because of this Talmid Chacham, there'll be a big crowd, and that's why we're allowed to make a hesped. Rish Lakish sapte lehu tzuvim rabbanim tishchiach ba'ar Yisrael. Rish Lakish gave a hesped to a Talmid Chacham who was not from Eretz Yisrael, he's from Babel, but he came to Eretz Yisrael, he used to be a lot in Eretz Yisrael. He would learn halachas, and to shayla b'chav daled shurasa means he had 24 rows of talmidim, the mace, or there are those who learn that the hesped was b'chav daled shurasa. And he said, Amar vai chasra ardi Yisrael gavarabba. Woe is to Eretz Yisrael, they lost a very chashav yid, this yid, who was Tani Hilchasa. Now, Tani Hilchasa is not the highest level. That's not Mishamish. It was just showing the Mishnayos to Talmidim, but it wasn't the highest level of learning that makes you that serve Marabon. Ahuda Tani Hilchasa, Sifra v'Sefri v'Tesefta. He learned all these things, but he didn't have Shimush Talmidei Chacham. V'Shachav, and he died. So a person who is similar, maybe even a little bit greater, to the person that Rish Lakish was maspid, and Rish Lakish was maspid with great respect, saying that Yisrael lost a very valuable person. And they asked Reb Nachman to give a hesped on this fellow. Reb Nachman, Amar, he said, how can I give a guy like his hesped? He has nothing to offer. Hechen isbedei. Hai tzana, the mullah sifri, the chaser. What am I going to say? That he's a container full of svarim that died? In other words, he didn't have an internal understanding of the Torah. He was just basically a receptacle with Torah in it, but it wasn't part of it. So you see how Rish Lakish gave much more respect to the same type of person who knew the Mishnayos but didn't really understand them thoroughly. Reb Nachman couldn't respect such a person. Zoktamar Tachazi Ma Beit Kifa the Aridi Yisrael LeChasidi the Bubble. Look at the difference between the greats of Eretz Yisrael, Rish Lakish, who was able to be maspid this yid, versus the Chasidi Bubble of Nachman, who couldn't be maspid this yid. And the Gemara tells us that Rish Lakish was such a great person that anyone who was caught speaking to Rish Lakish would be trusted by anybody. And therefore, Rish Lakish was very, very picky who he spoke to. He wouldn't even speak to Rabbi Bar Bar Chana because he wouldn't speak to anybody unless he was 1,000% sure that this person is rock solid. Tonight, as we learned, if you use the Torah, if you use the Kesher Torah Cholov, you're going to die. You're not allowed to use the Kesher Torah. Tani Rish Lakish, this is someone who is mishamish. He takes advantage, he allows someone to serve him, someone who learned halachas, shoshoyna halachas. Well, Omar Ula, and Ula says, l'shtamish inish b'man detani arba, a person is better off using someone who just learned 4 sidurim, v'loy l'shtamish b'man demasni arba, but not allow himself to be served by someone who taught the 4 sidurim. The other Rish Lakish have a ozal ba'urcha. He was traveling. Mata urkama demaya. He had a puddle, a ditch of water that he had to get through. So Asahu Gavra, someone came, Arkabe Akaspe. He put Rish Lakish on his shoulder to be Mechabi Rish Lakish, so Rish Lakish shouldn't get wet walking through the water. So he asked the person, Rish Lakish is sitting on this fellow's shoulders as he's walking him across the river, and he asked this person carrying him, Karis, did you learn Torah? Amalei Karina. Tanis, did you learn Mishnayos? Tanina. Arba Siddur Mishnah. I learned 4 Siddur Mishnah. Amalei. Pasaltalach. Arba Turi. You chopped 4 mountains. In other words, you learned through 4 Siddurim. The Ta'ant by Lakish Akaspech, and you're carrying me around. It's a bezoin for your Kabbalah Torah. Shadi by Lakisha B'maya. Put me right into the water. Drop me. Don't carry me. Amalei, the person carrying him, told him, Nichali da Ashmi'inon Lamar. I'm very happy to be Mishamish, the great Rish Lakish. Ihachi, the more mini hamilsa. So Rish Lakish said, if you're going to be Mishamish me, at least let me teach you a beautiful shtickle Torah, halach. The Amar Abzera said, B'nois Yisrael, Heinich Mir al Atzman, Shafilu Royis Tipas Dam Kechadul, Yoshevis Alav Shivinikia. Normally, if a woman sees Dam Nida, she's tummy for 7 days, and she could see Dam the entire 7 days, and at the end of the 7 days, then she's tar. But our women are makbid, no matter when they see a tipas dam, they always consider it like a zava gedola who soiser her shevanakiyim, who now has to count new shevanakiyim. So that's one halach, he said. And then he also told them, Tana de Belio, kol ashoyna halachos, b'chol yoim, I guess the Zion sticks that in, mufdach loy shu b'nei lamava, shenemar halichas oilam loy, altrit halichas al halachos, someone who learns halachos will have oilam haba. There's a famous story with Meir Shapiro. Someone asked him, it says, Alichas Olam Loi, who's that? So he asked Meir Shapiro, maybe, it doesn't say anywhere in the pasuk, Alichas Olam Loi, that you have to learn halachas every day. It says, if you learn halachas, you're ben Olam Haba. How do you know that you have to learn every day? So Meir Shapiro says, you're 100% right. It's possible that even if you only learn halacha once or twice, you'll go to Olam Haba. But if you want to be muftach lo yishu b'Olam Haba, if you want to be 100% sure, then you have to learn halachas every single day. Okay, have a wonderful, wonderful day. Hatzlacha Rabbah. Benti Zam Tzliach. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.